Good morning and welcome to the Importance of Identity Management Virtual Summit. For those of you who do not know me, my name is Alyssa Cole and I'm the event manager over here at ATARC, and I'll be emceeing today's summit. ATARC stands for the Advanced Technology Academic Research Center, and ATARC is a nonprofit that facilitates collaboration between government, industry, and academia in order to accelerate technology modernization initiatives. We provide ongoing opportunities for cross-agency collaboration through on-site interaction, learning, and market research. Thank you to our partners over at Beyond Trust for helping us to create today's summit. Truly great partners for us at ATARC. Additionally, I'd like to thank you for joining us today. We hope you have a great day and full of lots of information. We'd also like to remind you that after each panel, there will be a time for Q&A. Please place all your questions that you have in that Q&A box on the bottom of your screen. Also, during the panels, we'll have poll questions that go up. If you'd like to be eligible for CPE credits, please remember to fill those out. Up first, I would like to introduce our visionary keynote, Ken Myers. Ken is the Chief Federal ICAM Architect at the General Services Administration. Ken, please take it away.
Great. Thank you very much, Alyssa, and welcome everyone to today's ATARC event, the Importance of Identity Management. I want to say thank you to ATARC, Beyond Trust for putting on this fantastic event, but also Tom Suter and the ATARC team for their continued commitment to identity management through events like this, as well as the ATARC Identity Management Working Group and their recent white paper on HSPD-12 interoperability. I'm also excited to hear what the ATARC Identity Lab has planned in the future. Next slide, please. Like Alyssa mentioned, my name is Ken Myers. I'm the Chief Federal ICAM Architect, as well as the Director for the Identity Assurance and Trusted Access Division in the GSA Office of Government-Wide Policy. My main duty is to advise on government-wide identity policies and help agencies identify the best practices to successful ICAM implementation. Personally, I'm also writing a dissertation on cybersecurity workforce planning for the Doctorate of Science program at Marymount University. Next slide, please. Just to share a little bit of what our office does, we have three main functions. We help govern the federal PKI certificate policies. We test products under the FIPS 201 evaluation program. And we also coordinate FICAM initiative guidance to the ICAM subcommittee of the Federal CISO Council. So if your agency has questions, we'd love to assist you and answer any of those outstanding questions that you might have. And you can reach out to our office directly at icam@gsa.gov. All of the guidance that is published is available on idmanagement.gov or playbooks.idmanagement.gov. Next slide, please. So 2022, is this the year of digital identity? Or is it more like every year is the year of digital identity? It's actually fortuitous that we're talking today, given that OMB released Memo 22-16, which sets cybersecurity budget priorities for FY24. The two main budget items is the accelerated adoption of secure cloud infrastructure and services that leverage zero trust architecture, but also the use of shared security technology, such as the Department of Homeland Security's Continuous Diagnostics and Mitigation Program. It's also interesting to point out that we have a proposed Digital Identity Act that was reintroduced into Congress. And so to answer that question, does FICAM change with zero trust? I'm going to dive into two main points. Next slide, please. The first point is really zero trust in digital identity. Next slide. In OMB Memo 2209, so the key for federal zero trust is that 2209 sets the federal government's approach to zero trust. So this may differ from organizations outside the federal government or actually a vendor's description of zero trust, but that's why OMB is working closely with CISA, GSA, and NIST so that agencies can understand. So in Executive Order 1428, the president called out on the US government to make bold changes and significant investments. And just that bold changes and significant investments is really what is setting the direction for zero trust within the federal government. And actually within OMB Memo 2209, it sets very specific identity actions. Next slide, please. So it can't be understated. You can't do zero trust without identity. The federal zero trust strategy sets the federal government's approach to implementing a zero trust architecture. And there are three strategic digital identity objectives for federal zero trust. Next slide, please. And those 3 strategic objectives are aligned with identity, credential, and access management. The first one, identity, a centralized enterprise-wide identity system that provides a holistic view of users, similar to the master user record defined in DHS CDM program. The second, multi-factor authentication. So we're not just talking about PIV smart cards and other PKI-based credentials. OMB Memo 22.9 actually specifically mentions using FIDO2 and FIDO certified platform authenticators that leverage the web authentication standard. The third strategic goal is around user authorization that supports agencies in implementing more fine-grained options, such as role-based access, attribute, or even risk-based access control. Next slide, please. And actually along those lines, aligned with the budget priority, the ICAM subcommittee collaborated with the cloud and infrastructure community of practice this past year and published a cloud identity playbook. That's actually available on playbooks.idmanagement.gov. So one of the interesting myth busters that the group discussed is the idea that an organization has to go all in on using cloud, and that's not necessarily true. It's not cloud or nothing. And actually most agencies that utilize a cloud service are probably using a FedRAMP identity as a service or an IDaaS in a hybrid configuration. So with these 3 goals in mind, what are those baseline or focused ICAM capabilities that agencies should focus on? Next slide, please. And that's really where I'm going to spend the majority of my time for these last 7 minutes. Next slide, please. So we have our 3 strategic goals, and really, how does FICAM kind of align with those 3 strategic goals? And really, to answer that question, how does FICAM change with zero trust? It really doesn't. The 3 strategic goals are actually within the FICAM architecture, but actually, when we talk about how FICAM changes, it's more on where are we putting our focus. Where in the past, it may have been issuing a PIV smart card, getting that vetting completed, making sure all agencies have the vetting complete, and then that card is issued and that card is used. Now, today's focus is more on leveraging other types of phishing resistant authenticators, not getting rid of PIV, not getting rid of smart card, not changing anything about the vetting, but actually leveraging technology that agencies are using today. I mentioned under centralizing access, it's about having a master user record, which is a single identity that is linked to those multiple accounts, credentials, and other personas. So it links a user across those domains, across those systems, so that when an employee leaves, they change their role, or another administrative function happens, that access is removed in one system and it's provisioned in another. And really, the importance there is that there's no orphaned accounts. There's no way for that user to go back into a system that they shouldn't have access anymore. And it really, for example, like an enterprise admin that is provisioned in one system and they move, they no longer have admin access in that system. So the second, I mentioned multi-factor authentication. And like I said, it's not looking at something, we're not getting rid of PIV. FIPS 201-3 actually includes a broader definition of derived PIV that includes both public key infrastructure based or PKI and non-PKI. And really on that non-PKI side, and the one key difference here is really the emphasis or the highlight of using platform authenticators that are FIDO certified. And the one key difference there is that the technology that supports that is actually in use by many, almost maybe all agencies today. Whether you're using an identity as a service with your office collaboration tools, if that's Microsoft Azure or Google or others, most likely it does support FIDO2. And there are a lot of questions that agencies have around, can we use FIDO? How do we use FIDO? And those are questions that the ICAM subcommittee, along with CISA and OMB, are working out to help agencies understand how to use them. So again, just want to reiterate, it's not diverting a focus away from PIV and the vetting and PKI. It's more of expanding agencies' options in the technology that they're already using. Single sign-on. So this past year, the ICAM subcommittee published a single sign-on playbook that help agencies understand what single sign-on is and helps with some programmatic guidance on how to plan a single sign-on deployment. Most likely, most agencies are using single sign-on. The one key difference there is that if you're able to leverage a FedRAMP cloud single sign-on service, it may support that device level signal that's called out as an action item in Memo 2209. But going forward, I mean, single sign-on will most likely be the primary method that most agencies use to centralize access. And this is mostly focused on centralizing application access, but don't forget there's other types of access as well. Almost all users' access is over HTTPS to an application. So consider if your agency has other types of access where your user community need to be integrated. So integrating single sign-on with your master user record can also help with federating access to other agencies, as well as access to your own applications. Fourth bullet, so most likely agencies will implement fine-grained authorization through either a single sign-on tool or some type of network-based tool like a software gateway or an access proxy. So be prepared that there may be multiple policy enforcement points depending on that type of access. And that's really an interesting area that a lot of agencies are trying to understand is the multiple access points. And actually NIST just published a draft of their zero trust architecture on their website. The fifth bullet on there, something that can't be forgotten, can't be left out, is actually privileged users or privileged identity. Privileged identities are a primary target that can compromise our government data and our systems. The DHS CDM programs has been one of their staple actions ever since the CDM program was first established, and they provide a great privileged access management program and identity lifecycle management capability to help agencies bridge the gap in procuring solutions. So overall, to answer that question, how does FICAM change in zero trust? And really, it doesn't really change that much. These 5 primary focus areas, actually, we have guidance on playbooks.idmanagement.gov for half of them. And we're working with OMB and CISA on a phishing resistant authenticator playbook to help answer those kind of tough questions about how do we use non-PKI authenticators in a compliant manner that protects our systems. Next slide, please. So I want to thank everyone for attending today. Hopefully that was some new information. I tried integrating at least one piece of information that new. This FICAM focus is something I haven't shared anywhere. I want to do it just for the HTARC community today. So thank you very much, Tom and the HTARC team, as well as Beyond Trust, for hosting today's event and inviting me to be your keynote speaker.
Thank you, Ken. We'll see you on this panel, I guess.
Yes, sir.
In a second. Go ahead, Alyssa, if you want to.
Yes, thank you so much, Ken. That was a great keynote. Up next, we're going to have our first panel of the day. For this, we have Tom Suter moderating. Tom is the founder and CEO of ATARC. So Tom, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Alyssa, and thanks for helping us put together this program. It's a great keynote, Ken. If I can bring my panel on, I have a question for you, Ken. Is it okay if we share these slides out? Is this public information?
Yeah, of course. By all means.
Okay, great. So we'll send that out. I know we'll get a lot of questions about it. Hey, can you share this out? So I'm preempting that. I have some experience in these things. Really excited about this panel. To me, identity management is one of the tenets of zero trust. It's been one of the things that is baffled the government for a long time. It's been a constant challenge. So really excited to bring this great panel together. So we have the aforementioned Ken Myers. He's going to be on this panel with us. We also have John Pretz, who's a technical director and project officer for identity access management at the U.S. Army. How are you doing today, John?
I'm doing great. Morning to everyone.
Great. I guess the DoD and the Zoom aren't working with us this morning.
Yes. I had to get off my VPN so we can work.
Great. You working from home today? Or are you in the DC area?
I'm working from home today.
Great. Okay. Thank you. We look forward to your comments. We also have James Medlock, who's CDM Program Support Manager at U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs. How are you doing today, Jim? We got you on mute.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, doing well, doing well. It was a double mute challenged. Thank you for the invite.
No problem. Are you in the office today? Now we can't hear you again. You have the double mute thing going. You got
today.
Okay,
yeah, I work
great.
from home today.
I'm an old telecom guy, so like I believe in redundancy. So you got the double mute action going. That's fantastic. And we also, last but not least, I almost forgot Josh. How could I do that? Who's RVP of Public Sector Solutions Engineering Beyond Trust. How you doing there, Josh?
I'm great, Tom. How are you?
Great, great. Where are you working out of today?
I am actually on the road this week. I'm in Baltimore doing some client visits.
Fantastic. Welcome. I can never know where Josh is because he always has this background. He could be anywhere, So, and it's not. I am not actually overlooking DC right now. I always get these cryptic texts like, "Hey, I really want to go to your expensive condo on the top of Arlington," but no, this is my standard operating background. So maybe we can start off with you, James. Love to hear about your challenges with identity. You all are very far-flung. I don't forget how many embassies you have. You've got a lot of challenges there. And I actually saw some of your operation. I did a little tour a little while ago when Jerry was with you all. Did you work with Jerry?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. We did quite a bit. Can you hear me now? I tried to get undouble muted.
Hey.
Excellent. Yeah, the VA is huge, right? And that's one of the things. We're the largest civilian organization, and that's one of the problems we have. Most people don't realize the complexity, and I really line up in that keynote when we're talking about the differences between ICAM and FICAM, because if we were trying to put a identity program around ICAM, like a COTS solution, it would just be cost prohibitive. So we're really trying to drive that line between FICAM and ICAM in certain areas. But yeah, the VA, hundreds of locations, millions of identities, because we also can have the identity for every veteran that's served and their families. So we have over 50 million identities when you include the customer base.
Great. Great. We'll get into a little bit about how you all handle pandemic. I think that was a pretty good story that you all have there. John, if you don't mind some opening comments about what the U.S. Army is up to in identity these days.
So we're doing several efforts, but the main portion is zero trust, where we're trying to calibrate everything that we have under ICAM, like, for example, MFA, where we already have some multiple approaches that we have with YubiKey and a Mobile Connect that we created a couple of years ago. So I think we are in the path, and a good path on zero trust when it comes to MFA. When it comes to identities, we are working on identity governance. We're trying to have better provision and deprovisioning process and make sure the applications have one master user record, so we can centralize all the identities into one directory. That's the intensity that we have there. A lot of work done through that, but we still have to work more within the data. Data is the issue that a lot of people don't take in consideration. You gotta have the data organized in order to have a good ICAM solution, because otherwise we're gonna be all over the place. Also, we work in PAM. We're working into trying to bring PAM to the portfolio, but it's just more to find what are the actual master user or admin that the count of those records or access. It is painful to find out who really need that type of access within the applications. So it is a lot going on within the ICAM and the Army. while we trying to make sure that our leadership understand that that's one of the big problems that we have. We have great leadership, but they're not technical savvy, and they just can't trust the technical guys because they don't understand that's what we that's the friction between technicals and project managers. So we have to do better so they can understand the technicality of ICAM.
Right,
Over.
right. I think James is smiling a little bit too. We'll let that go. But yes, he's another big. Ken, maybe you can kind of give a little color to what you see across government, because you're now at OGP, you see things across government. Well, can you describe some of the different stages of maturity that some of these organizations have? I know we're dealing with a couple big organizations, but you can add a little color there before.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you can see a real difference, and the way I classify them are CFO Act and then non-CFO. So it's non-CFO Act, and then in the non-CFO Act side, CFO Act side, you can kind of categorize them from like big to micro. Like I mentioned in my keynote, the 5 kind of focus areas. Most agencies have that in some form. CFO Act, that bought into and work very closely with the CDM program, most likely have a master user record and a PAM solution in place, privileged access management solution in place. And if CDM is evolving with Zero Trust in 2209. So if your agency hasn't looked at CDM in a while, probably worth to reach out to them and see what kind of new capabilities, new functions, new functional requirements that they have in place. The one big question I'll say that my office gets is really around this, what is FIDO? What is it? Like, how do we use it? What is a phishing resistant authenticator? And I know NIST is updating 863, the digital identity guidelines. But until that happens, most agencies look at FICAM for guidance. And so we're working closely with OMB and CISA, as well as the ICAM subcommittee had a phishing resistant authenticator playbook. I wish that rolled off the tongue a little bit easier. I know ATARC, you have your identity lab, and I don't know if that's something that y'all are looking at also.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, maybe we can wait till Ross is on that committee, and maybe he can kind of, before we get in his presentation, he can talk more about it. It's just kind of getting cooked right now, actually. Yeah,
definitely. I mean, the two to three, I think, main questions that we get asked from a compliance standpoint is this HSPD 12 or FIPS compliant, and that's kind of a tough question to answer. The other question is, is this FIPS? How do I find a FIPS FIDO kind of approved authenticator? But also on the biometric side, if you're looking at a specific FIDO solution, such as like Windows Hello for Business that uses the biometric, how can I use that with in a FIDO or FIPS mode? So it's kind of those questions that we've been asked from agencies that will end up in this phishing resistant authenticator playbook. But I'll say that how do we use FIDO? What technology do we use is the big question.
Great. Thank you, Ken, for adding some color to that. We'll go over to Josh, and Josh, you guys do a lot of work outside of the federal government as well, but you see a lot of the capabilities that the government presently has. Love to hear your perspectives.
Yeah, so the one thing about ICAM as a whole, and kind of narrowing down to PAM, as John was talking about, we are seeing a continued significant interest in adoption of both ICAM and PAM inside that. I think the planning and strategy and architecture is a challenge for agencies as you attempt to architect and design something that is a fundamental shift in the way that you secure and ultimately handle identities across your network. It's something that you have to think through. It's something that you have to work through and make sure that you're not impacting mission or workflow. But ultimately, it's something that has to get done. So I think we're seeing people tackle that challenge. I think obviously with the EOs and mandates that are coming out, people have to, and they're putting plans together, and we're seeing progress on that. But everybody still has a road to go in some form. Some of them are further down the road than others.
Great, thank you for that. We've got a few poll questions, and I think we'll just kind of start off with a level setting one. And for those of you that want to get their CP credits, please answer, please answer these questions. We think they're important. Do you think identity management solutions will suit my business's future needs? Single choice. And for those of you in industry, just if you're working for a government client, just let them know. We'll see how this goes. Okay. Sometimes I think I know what the polls are going to do, and sometimes I don't. So we'll see what everybody says here. Can we, Anna, can we pull up the results? All right. That's actually kind of promising. Any comments on that? Or is that higher than we thought? Good. Maybe we're doing a good thing here at ATARC, and you all are coming together. So good. I think we've gotten a lot of experience. Maybe my first question is just, the kind of the pandemic. That really got us a lot of good practice in this field. James, I haven't had a chance to talk to you. What are some of the things that we've learned from pandemic about this subject that you guys have applied?
Well, I tell you what, that was a black swan event. And I think nobody was prepared for it. We were lucky that I think it was a bit of luck, but it was also a bit of planning, not necessarily for that, but we were pretty well positioned in the identity management side, just because we know we have so much growth and we have so many things in place. So we had quite a bit. We'd already implemented PIV cards, or personal identity verification capabilities, 2FA, MFA. We're pretty far along with that, for all of our employees and contractors. And I mean, I think the statistic was around 94% fully compliant with PIV. At that point in time, and that differential was approved exceptions or exemptions for like sterile environments, things like that. So we already had those in place. So we had identity, but the crazy part was the capacity for from people that were in partial telework to going to full telework. So it was really just expanding our current infrastructure and the capability to support that surge in volume of new full-time teleworkers. And there was because we do support, banking, we support finance, we support more cemetery affairs, because there was a lot of veterans that had passed away during that time. So we still had to provide them services, right? And then we also have healthcare services for veterans. So we had to keep portions of those facilities and all that open. So we did have a period where facilities were closed, and we had to loosen some of those processes and some of those securities to allow for operations and continue customer support for our veterans. That's our primary mission and goal. So in that whole security or operations and customer support, that CIA triad had to availability had to start taking over a little bit more from so we had to back off a little bit in a couple of areas until we can get operations and maintain customer support. But those were all temporary exemptions that were closely monitored, and they were removed as soon as reasonable. But yeah, it was a very trying time. Lots of hours and a lot of technology was procured to support that surge.
Oh yeah, yep. And John, you're next, and I'm really interested in this. My son's I keep saying second lieutenant. He just got promoted a couple weeks ago. He's a first lieutenant in the Army, and he had an onboard. And during the pandemic, he graduated from college during the pandemic. And I'd love to hear some of the lessons you all learned in the U.S. Army.
Yeah, within the pandemic time, the identities were there. It was more about how do we calibrate within the pandemic environment. And we brought over Teams. That was one of the tools that we used to enhance that communication for teleworking. So the identities, we also trying to leverage more solutions to not to use the NPEs, the government equipment. So that's what we find some tools that we can leverage MFA without using your own, we using your personal device. That's what we are right now. So we're just trying to expand that effort to see how it's going to work, but the more devices than not government owned. So it's still a work in progress.
Yeah, I think I'm going to ask that. That's going to be my next question: is where do we go from here, kind of thing. Now that we've had pandemic, Ken, just some things you've noticed in trends across all government agencies.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I like to start off discussions when I'm talking with agencies about ICAM is follow the traffic, right? So before the pandemic, all of the traffic or all of the access was either in an office or through like a virtual private network or VPN, because that's where security staff was, or maybe that's where the data was. You had to be on an agency network to do that. And then what the pandemic showed was that we could no longer be in the office, or maybe agencies hadn't even planned for remote use cases. I mean, similar to what James said about their exemptions to specific types of smart card access is very common across multiple agencies. They, had to kind of immediately, to maintain their mission, immediately make changes that kind of, I mean, just ensure they could continue their mission even in the remote environment. And that's, I mean, that's really where kind of a lot of the direction in 2209 or the federal zero trust strategy kind of will help agencies move their technology along and get out of the kind of the moat approach to defense, to really think about kind of what the FICAM architecture even like proposed like 10 years ago, talking about role-based access, attribute-based access. And I think now, I mean, this technology has really caught up to the point where we can kind of realize some of those more advanced, more mature kind of ICAM capabilities in the technology that agencies are buying today.
Thank you, Ken. Josh?
Yeah, so I think for us, what we realized is, at least both on the commercial side and the government side, there were definitely a lot of agencies that weren't prepared from a technology standpoint to support a significant rise in work from home. So we saw an increase in obviously urgency and scale and deployment of work from home solutions for agencies, wanting staff to be able to remote into desktops that they already had existing, to be able to manage infrastructure from home, to be able to manage infrastructure from other places. So we saw obviously a significant uptick in that. In addition, how to manage those devices once they got out there. I mean, now all of a sudden, everybody's teenager's PS5 is on the corporate network, and you've got to figure out what to do with that. So, what to do with those endpoints, because you no longer have a perimeter. When you have your entire staff working from home, the perimeter doesn't exist anymore. Hence, the push for these identity-centric type networks. So yeah, I mean, I think while some people may have had a head start and some people kind of knew where they were headed, there was definitely a gut reaction from a lot of people that, oh, we're not ready for this. I think within the first 3 months of the pandemic, there was something like a 70% increase in open RDP facing ports to the internet. So people just said, you know what, this won't last very long. We'll just open up RDP to the world and let people into our networks for a few minutes, because this is the fastest way to do this. Well, we're now 27 months into it, and it's still here for the moment, at least. So
that's depressing. 27 months. I can't believe it's been that long. So my next question, I'm going to kind of put together a couple little concepts here, but what's the importance of identity management within the federal agencies, and how has a hybrid workforce affected it? And I'm going to throw in BYOD, because I know John talked about it a little bit. Is the tolerance for BYOD changed? And I'll start with you, James. You were mentioning before that some of the policies changed and now they're kind of reverting back to what they were, but how are you all handling this hybrid workforce issue? Seems like we're headed that way. Go ahead.
Yeah, the hybrid workforce, we're still maintaining that where we can. And I really think that this is been a change in overall mindset for a lot of companies. We've really looked at some of the facilities that we've been using just to house people that may not have been providing services. Maybe we can look at rationalizing those large expenditures for facilities, because if we can trust our employees and they do the work efficiently at home, why can't they work from home? Why do we need to have the burden of some of the superstructures that we have? So we are looking at they're looking at some of the rationalization of some of the buildings, the structures, if they can maintain their work roles, their jobs, they can maintain the support of operations and their customers. So I think for a lot, this has been a kind of a blessing in some of the mindset of leadership. I've been I've been in a long time ago. I've been in a role where you almost thought that there was a temperature sensor in my chair, because every 2 minutes after I got up out of my chair to go somewhere, my boss like, hey, you're away, and I'm like, because I could do that with some of the tools available, and I'm like, but it's okay, you could be away from your desk. And this hybrid environment's working out pretty well for a lot of them. And in many cases, unless you're directly dealing with the customer, unless you're directly dealing with the veteran, we are continuing to try to minimize the amount of people that could potentially come in an arbitrary, not arbitrary, but if you don't have to be there, if you might be, get contagious because you have a child or something, you might be bringing that in. So if you don't have to bring that into the work environment, if you don't have to expose the rest of your team and potentially expose one of our veteran customers, we don't want you to, or they don't want you to. So they're trying to still minimize that. They're still trying to be cautious of that while maintaining that level of operations and support. Hopefully that answers your question, but you did have the other piece about BYOD, separate networks, and then also anything that's for our Citrix access gateways where they're using personal machines or contractors that don't have GFE government furnished equipment. We'll drop them into a Citrix sandbox environment, so they have no access, no capability, no ability to pull data out, print, or store data on that personal machine. So it's totally isolated out, and they're working in that sandboxed environment inside our network space, not on their personal environment.
Great, thank you. And John?
So we are expanding our identity within classified environments where that's the reason, I guess, the government is trying to bring the support back to the office, because while we working on a solution for classified network, that we still have to continue with the work process that we have on the classified network. That's one of the reasons that people have to go back to the office, because we have to make sure that everything gets taken care of, but while we were looking for a solution to work in a transition process of working from home within classified network. That's another options that we're looking for. But I'm with everybody. I mean, we have better and better environment working from home, and we work more efficient from home, and we put more, in my opinion, we put more hours working from home than being in the office. So I'm half and half. I think I want to go back to the office, but at the same time, I want to stay home working and near my family. But it is what it is. We got to continue with the business.
Yeah. Ken?
I mean, I'll just hop on. I mean, John's comment from like a non-technology perspective. I mean, I'm a supervisor within GSA, and I'm always looking out for my people for burnout. I mean, it's really easy when you're working from home, for the two to mix together, and you have to, especially, I mean, GSA, even sends out on a regular basis, like reminders and different tools that we have within GSA to use to make sure that, we have that a real work-life balance, and we have ways to, quote unquote, like get out of our home office and go do stuff. So that's something that, just as leaders, we need to remind our people about.
Yeah, I think you're right, Ken. I know at GSA, they were really great for having back-to-back-to-back meetings. Now with Zoom, you can have back-to-back-to-back-to-back meetings, it's tough to get a break.
Yeah, definitely. I don't know with the back-to-back, I don't know how, if you did that in person, really hard to get in between meeting rooms,
Yeah, I know, and take care of business sometimes. Josh.
Yeah, to James's comment earlier, as the father of 4 kids, I can definitely say that children are contagious. So I highly recommend you get vaccinated against that, because they are absolutely contagious. Don't do that. You don't want those. No, I'm just kidding. So as a work from home perspective, I can 100% say that it does present its own unique challenges. I manage an entirely distributed team, and when I started, took over as a leader, I will admit that there was a part of me that when I would look at someone and I would look at their team status and they would be away, I would think, hey, are we working today or are we not working today? And it was a mindset shift that I had to make that was different. That, hey, look, as long as these guys are getting their work done, as long as everybody's getting their job done, they have their own time. They can go walk their dog. They can take their lunch. It's not, it's whatever it is. And I think there's been an entire mindset shift around that during COVID, that people need their mental health. They can go for a run at 11 o'clock and it's okay. And that's a mindset shift that had to occur there, but then the technology had to support it. We had to reach a spot where we were able to, from an identity and authorization perspective, we had to be able to identify patterns of behavior for people logging into networks, to know that they were logging into a network at an appropriate time, and that the authentication that was happening was appropriate, that we had appropriate levels of authentication, whether that was 2FA or whether we were using PIV cards or whatever that was. So, I mean, I think, again, there was a rush to catch up with a lot of that stuff, and we're still working on it. But I definitely think, the identity centric network again has supported that work from home movement. As far as BYOD, I may have a different perspective on this, and it's kind of flows off of the last comment I made. I think making the argument for a separate BYOD network gets a little hazy when a huge chunk of our workforce is working from home and all of their home networks are now attached to our network. When we have people that are running VPNs and every Fire Stick in the world is now connected to a corporate VPN somewhere, it's really difficult to say that when you come in, you can't connect your Android device to my Wi-Fi. That's just kind of my perspective on it, and I think it's a challenge that we have to look at. It's a challenge that we have to figure out how to isolate those other devices that are behind that are in those work from home situations, as we're working through VPNs and remote access and all those other things, and we're kind of handling those edge scenarios. But yeah, that's kind of the way that I look at it.
Thank you, Josh. Let's get a couple more poll questions in. And once again, if anybody has any questions, please put them in the chat. What are you most worried about with identity access management solutions? Single choice. Is it scalable? Will it receive future patches and updates? Will it receive any new releases? Will it be cost effective? We don't have an all the above. I was really good at, those kinds of things in school. I would probably put all the above on that, but let's see which is the most, see what people come up with. All right. We have a quorum there, Hannah. Interesting. Cost effective and scalable. It actually makes sense. Anybody want to comment on that? Was that you wanted to say something? Go ahead, John.
Yeah, in my opinion, you're right on point. It's scalability and cost effective. So I have problems with the vendors. I can't continue per user cost models. We got to move to, if we do an enterprise solutions, we got to move to enterprise cost model. And that's what the burn that I feel every time I bring a vendor to my office and talk to them about. And they ended up, the solution is great, but what is the cost? And then that everything goes down the hill. And that's what I just we got to make sure that we buy a solution, acquire a solution that is cost effective for the company that you work for, and scalability too. So I mean, if it costs that much, it has to be scalable. I mean, it's an enterprise solution. If you go for an enterprise solution, it has to be scalable. So I just, and then implementation of that solution has to be effective too. So it's a combination of a lot of things. But my two points that I'm trying to address is the cost and the scalability. Over.
Josh, you want to add anything to that since you're the industry person on this panel? You know, I know that costing from Gartner, it's always like pricing is always like a big thing, and there's always new models coming up.
Yeah.
Any comments?
So I mean, this is kind of interesting. You know, talking about the kind of industry as a whole. In some ways, I agree with John. I mean, you know, as we move to this model of this is our security practice, we have to realize that this is an enterprise-wide model. No matter how we're doing this, this is an organization-wide model. So defining this in a user scope or a device scope from an identity and access management standpoint is going to be more difficult as it continues to scale, if this is truly the way that we want to secure our networks. But ultimately, ultimately, it is the right way to secure our network. So I think, you know, the cost value proposition here is it gets really high before it's no longer a no-brainer. The cost of a breach that you're going to suffer because you're not putting in these practices are significantly more than what implementing these best practices are going to cost. So.
Great. Thank you for that, Josh. A last poll question. I got to get this in before I get in trouble. I'm not so worried about getting in trouble with a CIO or something, but the polls are, you got to get these done or we lose our you know, our authentic, you know, our ability to give out credit, you know, these credits that we're supposed to. My MFA is authenticated directly by my application, essentially within SSO Federation application, depends on the MFA I use. My organization does not use or enforce MFA. Right. We'll see what we got with that one. Okay. Josh, any comments? Is that kind of what we expect, or is that anything surprise you with that?
That's a lot of what I expect. I mean, you know, a lot of the MFA providers are pushing their central gateway to do this as a way to handle MFA. So I'm not entirely surprised by this. You know, we see more and more adoption of Okta behind you know, behind a Duo MFA portal, or even Duo itself is implementing Duo Central, I think it's called. So you know, then I'm not super surprised by those results.
This is James. Yeah, one of the things you're also seeing is a lot of the MFA companies don't have that full capacity. There was a previous company that, well, they created the middleware, they created the backend, and they created the token, right? So they had that full ecosystem of the devices, the credential holder. They supported all of that. They even had the applications, the mobile pass phone solutions, right? They had that whole ecosystem. You have a lot of companies now that have they're brokering or their middleware MFA solutions, but they don't have a token, right? So you have to go to a different vendor to get that token. So there's a lot of solutions where they have some dependencies, like Josh was saying, on other vendors, either to complete the solution, or they're not horizontally scalable for all the different use cases, internal IAM, internal PAM, external to internal, or based off the type of systems and legacy systems. So there's a lot of complexity when you say IAM, and I think that's where you have that overlapping dependency.
Gotcha. John, did you have something to say?
Like James said, there is no a single question can give you a complete ICAM. You have to piecemeal the process slowly until you understand ICAM. And then once you understand ICAM, you bring the vendors that you need to have the solutions that you're looking for. And when I said piecemealing, it's just the understanding ICAM and bring them slowly to your environment. You just can't have ICAM at once, because you can't eat the entire elephant at once. You gotta come up slowly, and based on your requirements, inject that solution that you're looking for. No vendor will give you everything that you're looking for. That I learned this for the past 7 years. I've been building ICAM for the Army, and I learned this in a hard way. And we have to learn who owns the ICAM environment out there when it comes to the vendors. Have a relationship with them, and understand what their solutions they have in the portfolio and what are you looking for. They got to understand your requirements in order to move forward to what's the utopia that you're looking for. Over.
Great. Thank you
If-
for that.
If I can I
ahead.
just add one thing to John's? So whenever we started peeling apart a privileged access management and doing some of the identity access management, right now we have over 117 use cases that we're working through. That's different methods and technologies and access methods, tools, and step-up authentications that we're having to deal with. So just it's taken us time to define all of our requirements, put use cases and build stories around them so that we really understand what our requirements are. And then we start working with the vendors to address those requirements and capability gaps, and then rationalize the ones we don't need that have just built up over legacy, legacy buildup over time.
Yes. So my next question is, how can you speak of the kind of resources you need to implement identity authentication practices in an organization? Maybe start off with you, Ken.
Yeah, I'll be honest, this topic is very close to home. I mentioned, in my intro, I'm doing pretty much digital identity workforce planning. And so it's looking at not just like the evolution of how a digital identity professional is developed, but also from like a team and program perspective. And actually if you go on playbooks.idmanagement.gov, there is a identity governance framework. Within there is actually a competency model for ICAM professionals. And so it breaks down the FICAM architecture and the main kind of services within federal identity credential access management, and aligns that with identity management kind of tasks and knowledge, as well as credential and access management. So if you haven't seen it, I know it might be hidden on our site, I would check it out. I know it kind of hit close to home for me because it definitely within my own skill set, I'm kind of solid on access, single sign-on, pretty good on credentials, but then like really understanding like identity proofing. It seems like identity proofing and identity proofing tools and methods is something like specific in federal government that is maybe a human resources function outside the government. But I mean, that's what I noticed. Back to you, Tom.
Great, thank you. James?
I would look at that, a lot of the similar items that Ken sent. And for us, we do, for identity proofing, it can only be done by a full-time employee. We can't have contractors do identity proofing for governmental resources. So our Office of Security, they handle that. We go through this similar process with our issuing of our PIV credential, so that process is part of that same piece. And so only an area manager or facility manager can perform that process of identity proofing, validating you are who you say you are before we give you that that credential or that authorization, or even issuing our step-up authentication or step-up identity proofing solutions. Because we in the VA, just as a separate set, we have a policy that no administrative activities can be done on your regular daily driver user account. So we have a separate account that gets created, and that has a totally separate authentication method and mechanism. And so that has to have a separate identity proofing that has to be done by a federal employee. So there's some separation in how we do that work in policy, and that policy gets driven down into the operation requirements, which means we need two systems, two different types of identity systems for that authorization and authentication. Now they both revert back to Active Directory and our master user record and our master identity tool, but they both source that as the authoritative source for those two different identities.
Thank you, James. And John?
It's like James just pointed out, you gotta have the right data and the right people managing that data, and just gotta make sure that those policies are in place. Or
Okay. Josh, any final thoughts on this question? We got one more in us here, but.
Yeah, it is about having those policies in place, and from a PAM perspective, our preference would be that those privileged accounts aren't actually accounts that are able to be logged in directly by the user, but that's something they have access to that can be checked out, or that have sessions, because you don't want someone to have permanent privileged access. We want to enforce that just in time access model. So
thank you. We just got to have a couple of minutes. Maybe we can discuss what are the plans for the next 12 months. So when we get this band back together next year, what are you working on now that we can get a sneak peek for? Maybe start off with you, James.
Well, it's digesting the government regulations that came out, EO 14028, looking at OMB M22-09, trying to implement a lot of those philosophies. A lot of the philosophies the VA already had in place, just because we're all cybersecurity professionals. We're trying to do the best we can. We all think that way already, but they put down some pretty strict rules in place, and then also implementing those types of rules, understanding where we are, where we want to be, where we need to be regulatory from a government standpoint, and then aligning our tasks of what we're trying to do, not just to check the block with security, not to check the block with identity, but actually applying security so that we can always try and understand. And we say this all the time in the VA, is we talk about Lincoln's promise to our veterans, and what are we doing today to protect our veterans' data? What are we doing to protect our veterans' identity? And we talk about that a lot because we want to instill that. So everything we try and do, we're doing this for a purpose. We're not just checking a block. How are we, what are we doing today to protect for the future? And so that's the same thing. When you put that to identity, it's lining out that structure. We have a new CIO, very significant civilian background from a large corporation, and he's bringing a new kind of mindset, and it's really refreshing. Very technical individual, but he's kind of changing the mindset of a lot of folks as in his method for the future vision of cybersecurity and identity. It's got a huge focus. He actually brought up and said, access control is my passion. When your CIO says access control is my passion and I want to talk about it. So that's where we are with the VA. It's a hot seat.
John?
So currently we have an authentication solution that is solid, that support on-premise and cloud solutions, we have MFA under that SSL solution, and it's solid. We want to continue with what we have, but the next step is to implement PAM. So that's what we're working right now. We work in the acquisition process to acquire a solution for that. Also, the Army is concentrating now and MPE. So we gotta create a directory for devices. That's MPE. So that's what we're moving up to, and we're trying to merge the tactical with the strategic environments where you gotta talk to each other. We're centralizing the ICAM solution, and we have to have one ICAM solution between tactical and strategic enterprise services. That's what we're moving forward to. Or
Great, thank you. Ken?
Yeah, I mean, I said during my keynote, 2022 is the year of digital identity. I have a feeling 2023 is going to be the year of digital identity also. Yeah, just on my last slide, those 5 focus areas will definitely be, the primary areas. I mean, it's all about collaboration where I work, either through the ICAM subcommittee with OMB and CISA, and then reaching out to our agency partners so they understand the guidance and their questions are answered and they're able to deliver their mission.
Great, thank you, Ken. And Josh, can you take us home on this panel? Thanks so much for helping us out with this. And I know you guys really came up with some of the questions, helped us with that. Appreciate it.
Yeah, sure. I'm glad to. I think as we look across the next 12 months, 18 months, we're going to see a continued collaboration and focus on identity privilege and how it affects zero trust and zero trust network access. And we're going to see all of those things continue to collide the way that they have, and you'll see more and more you'll see more and more solutions collaborating together to work towards that end. So I think when we get to span back together next year, we'll be having more and more conversations about how things like Zscaler or whatever, whatever flavor you chose for some of your edge solutions, how that integrated into your identity solution and what that access looked like. So.
Yeah, I think John was talking a little bit about that. It's going to be integration of all these different tools because there's not like one solution that is the magic bullet. Well, thank you, James, John, Josh, and Ken. Appreciate your time. And we will go into our fireside chat with the esteemed Ross Ford. And Ross is the ICAM subject matter expert at the CDM program over at CISA, which is the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency at the United States Department of Homeland Security. So if we can get Ross on, I think you're on, Ross.
I am here. Can you hear me?
Yeah. I can hear you. There we go. We can see you too.
Sorry about that. I'm a
doing,
little bit, I'm doing okay. At the wonders of technology, today my laptop decided I can see my camera's on, but it's not doing anything with it, right? It's just on. So I'm using my phone, so it's a little bit constrained. I hope you can hear me well.
We can hear you fantastic. And Ken Myers, who gave us a great keynote, he actually asked a question. Maybe we can, before we get into your topic, which is, to me, it's like, the next phase of identity management. The actual title is, what are we talking about? It's not handy here. Managing millions of machine identities across hybrid cloud environments. And I don't think we've ever done anything like this. So,
no.
But before you do that, Ken wanted to know a little bit more about this lab and this pilot that we're doing with the identity management group at ATARC. Maybe we can cover that for a minute or two and send out some information to some folks. But if you can add a little color to that before we get into the meat of our topic.
Yeah, sure. I want to talk. There's a few different labs that ATARC is doing, right? Not the least of which is the zero trust work, right? And many identity providers are participating in the zero trust lab because it's central to doing zero trust architectures, right? But additionally, we have folks from over GSA that are trying to look at modernizing some of the capabilities to use alternate authenticators is what we call them, right? And I think also whether you do that through mobile devices or whether you do that some keys, security keys, those will probably be both things that we'll be testing out in the lab. There's also some, I heard you mention talking about identity proofing in the previous call, and there's actually good, there's good need around sharing the identity information that the government has, and actually OMB has asked for that. And I'm sure in some labs at some point in time, we'll be able to talk about how we share that information. Right now, the information sharing around who you are in the federal government is kind of a barrier. If you go from one agency to another, being able to do that, share that information that you've already done your identity proofing through one agency, at another agency, it's not, it's not well available. So there's a lot of things that we'll be doing in the lab, and those just touch on some of the things that we've talked about doing.
Great. Well, thank you for that. Now to the topic at hand. What are some of the challenges of millions of machine identities? We're talking about the humans, and that's hard enough. We've been talking about that for a long time, and it's an ever evolving area. Tell us a little bit about some of the challenges. That'd be great.
The government is really for a long time focused on human identities, and we've done a pretty good job of making sure that we know who the human identities are, doing the identity proofing for them, and then issuing a strong authenticator in the form of a smart card. But that's kind of being overcome by the number of machine identities that are emerging. And when I say machine identities, I mean both workloads that are operating in your environment on behalf of users, and devices themselves, which all need to have a device identity that you can rely on, right? Similar to the way you rely on a human identity. These particularly the machine identities as well, but particularly the workload identities, where a process is talking to another process through an API, whether it's to do service management or to do robotic process automation. Those are growing at a very large rate. And so one of the things I'll say about that, not only are they growing fast, the space, and we'll talk about some of these details, the different way one identifies and manages these machine identities and device identities, it varies. There's some convergence that's beginning, but it's actually a lot of different point solutions and tools that do that.
Yeah, I mean, just one question that comes to mind is, how do you manage all this? I mean, when somebody leaves the government, we finally, I think, gotten to the point where they leave, we erase them from exchange, right? How do we have a process that's working for a while. How do we shut all these things down and manage that process?
I'll talk a little bit about the kind of tools that we use today that can be used to help manage those users. But I think maybe the first thing to do is, I think I'll outline, what the strategy should be, right? And then we'll talk in more detail about how we do this. The thing I want to stress is no one should expect that a single tool is going to be able to cover the territory we're talking about. It's going to be multiple tools, and because there's multiple tools, they also are represented by multiple people in your organization. You're going to need people from your identity and access management group, but you also need developers. They're the ones that often utilize workload identity in different forms, and they're the ones doing the development of the robotic process automation, right? So they need to be involved early. Often in agencies that are modernizing and going to the cloud, these are DevOps teams. So they're actually reacting to the agency's needs by rapidly providing new service functionalities to their customers, their consumers, right? And they do that in a manner that often introduces automation. So you need to have those teams on board. Of course, you need security teams, and your traditional identity and access management folks need to be on this, working together. So my recommendation is that agencies form a machine identity working group is probably the best way to call that, and to bring these different constituents together, because they all have different keys, tokens. We mentioned tokens earlier, certificates. We'll talk a bit about the difference between PKI certificates of use for users and the ones that may be able to be used for machine identities. And I think the initial goal is to really understand the inventory of what you are using in your environment today, and then have a structure for how you're going to be managing and deploying those in the future.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. What are some of the best practices do you recommend for managing machine identities?
Yeah, I, you know, I like I said, I think one of the best practices is actually, it might be a little bit of a, when you think about best practice, you kind of think about getting a single pane of glass so you can do this. I would say that currently a best practice would be not having a single pane of glass, right? That you actually have focuses based upon the tools, and not only just the tools, but the tools are there for different purposes. So perhaps this might be a good time for me to talk about some of the different types of certificates and secrets and the different components that you're going to likely see as you go about to manage your machine identities, right? And the first thing I want to say is there's a couple of aspects to, just like in human identity, there are two parts that go into any identity solution. The first is the identifier, and that ties you uniquely to some person, or in this case, some device. And then the second is going to be the credential, right? The secret you use to make sure that when that identifier is interoperating with the system, you can trust that it's only that person, right? So I think one of the things that is different between human identity and device identity is you're not going to identity proof an individual. What you're going to be doing is providing some trusted user that will be, or group of users that'll be in charge of managing this device or this workload. So you're going to have a way to identify these folks. Luckily, if we refer to the previous panel, privileged access management is probably one of the ways you're going to want to determine the people that own these identifiers, that they're privileged users in your environment, right? Because they can do things. So you need to make sure that they are using, the humans that are managing these devices are managed within your privileged access management service. Now let's talk a little bit about the tools, right? One of those tools that is available is PKI, right? This is not your PKI that is for your human user. This is another form of PKI. And one of the things agencies should realize is that federal PKI is not well suited for this currently. We don't have good device management within our federal PKI. So you need to think about you're going to need to think about having some strategy for providing PKI services for your for your devices. Some of those device management systems that you have, they have a certificate management system, but you need to make sure that's part of your trusted environment, right? And I mentioned certificate management. That is a tool it's a tool that's important, and not all PKI infrastructure is equal. So you can have a certificate management system that doesn't generate certificates, but it manages certificates on behalf of another certificate authority. They call these key management systems or certificate management systems. And the job for those, and this is an important job, is to manage the life cycle of the cryptographic keys. Because as you mentioned, I got to be able to, when that system no longer is active in my environment, I should make sure that the keys are not activated, right? That is the life cycle. Just like there's a life cycle of a user, I come in the environment, I have a certain job, and I leave. Similar to that, we need to do a life cycle management on these keys. I think I'll stop right there for this. I'm sure I'll touch on more tools and more techniques as we go through this.
Yeah. And now that we're moving to a hybrid cloud environment, what are some of the challenges with that? There's multiple things moving at the same time. It's kind of, what challenges are with the hybrid cloud environment?
That's a really good point. The technologies that we use sometimes are common between the what I'll call the on-premise or the legacy environment and the cloud environment. And sometimes they're differentiated, right? Let's just talk a little bit about, but I'll also say before I talk about the different types, I'll say that the cloud service providers are all providing some built-in capabilities, right? For managing your infrastructure as a service. There's varying levels of maturity in those tools, and they differ in how they implement those the secrets management across the different environments. But I'll say that they all have some some service capability that where they can help deliver some of the tools that we're talking about, right? Some of the differences are that there's prevalent use of SSH keys. I'll talk about that a little bit more. X509 certificates, and particularly self-signed certificates that are short-lived, are kind of common in the container world. JSON web tokens, they call them JOTs, are often used for APIs for accessing protected services in the cloud. So that's kind of while it's not impossible to use those in the legacy environment, particularly the JOTs, they're much more prevalent in the cloud environment where these new technologies are deployed. I mentioned briefly SSH key management. SSH is the oldest security protocol that I call. I think it was introduced in 1995, so it's been around a long time. And it can be used for individuals to log in to machines, but it also can be used for machine-to-machine communication. It also highlights some of the differences about how so SSH can use certificates, and it can use passwords, right, or stored or shared secrets. The certificate is not the same kind of certificate you use for, say, TLS. And those are some of the things why I mentioned you need to have a team that is focusing on how to do these digital identities, because the technologies, they vary, and you need to have people that understand the differences in those variations, right? But I do want to say this about tools, whether they're on-premise or in the cloud. There's some capabilities that are similar to what we've already been doing as we're managing privileged accounts on-premise. And Josh mentioned the tools that he has, the PAM tools, the capabilities he has, and in fact, all of the previous speakers mentioned that. The privileged access management tools that we're deploying, most of them can also be used to help manage machine identities. So as you get, as agencies and organizations get better at managing privileged users of a human type, they'll also be able to get better at and understand how better to manage identities that are machine identities. And the tools will do that as well. They may require different licenses and different techniques, but the tools tend to be able to help you manage both human and machine identities.
Great. We got a question from the audience. Love to have one or more of your guests talk about the growing and future use of ephemeral credentials, and how these are about. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's a great question, right? Secrets managers, and particularly those like I said, in modern technologies, they're using automation, right? And that's really one of the important aspects of machine identity management. Is doing machine identity management in a manual way is not a really good approach, right? It tends to have you tend to create single long-term tokens that if they can be exfiltrated, then they can be used in other contexts, right? So what you want to do is you want to have more purpose-built secrets, and you want to rotate those secrets, right? So what my colleague says ephemeral is an ephemeral token is what you want to use, right? And the machine itself, it's gonna rotate the keys often through what they call a refresh token, so even if some nefarious actor got involved in the system, they would not be able to take advantage of that token for any other purpose, right? It's only there for that one system that it's providing service for.
Great. Another question is, what are some of the lessons you've learned and challenges you faced throughout this process? What surprised you too?
So I mean, we're just beginning this process, right, in the federal government. I'll say that it's not that we haven't thought about this process long ago. Even in the original FICAM roadmap, NPE was was called out as non-person entities, were called out as users that you want to manage your environment, right? Entities you want to manage. But it's only been recent that the urgency to do this has been quite high. And so I will say that first getting recognition that we also need to do this has been somewhat of a challenge, right? Just getting the recognition that these machine identities need to be managed as well as human identities has been a challenge. On my program, we focused primarily on making sure that all identities had the smart card, and so they were all employees and contractors had smart cards and they're well known. And then finally privileged users, right, which we're continuing to operate on. We added just in the last year non-person entities to some of the requirements. That was done for two reasons. One is a focus. We wanted to focus on being able to have privileged users that could then manage these devices, right? And that was really, we knew that we needed to do one step and then the next step, that you really need to be managing all your privileged users before you could figure out, what those privileged users are managing in terms of devices. And that goes for robotic process automation and processes, as well as mobile devices and those kind of things, right? So we added that, and some agencies are actually working, like VA, which is a pretty advanced agency, right? They're working towards that end. But not every agency has had the focus to be able to consider these non-person entities. So we're trying to help agencies, understand what is involved here, and that's one of the approaches that I think we're recommending.
So my final question is, where do you see this going for like maybe the next 8 to 12 months?
So
what are your short term?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things in the next 8-12 months, right? First of all, understanding that some of the capabilities that are being delivered to you already are helpful in this regard, right? So let's talk about identity governance administration tools. They generally have been used to manage wholly to manage users, and I think that they'll be extending their ability to manage the devices as well. But I think primarily what I'd like to see agencies do is use their identity governance tools to manage the privileged users, right? Focus on making sure your privileged users are managed, and then you assign, to known people the ability to manage these machine identities and these processes, right? So that's the managing of the identities or the identifiers themselves. Now let's look at the access management side of it, right? Because each of these, the reason these things exist is so they can log in and do some business, right? Look at where your access management tools, the ones you have today, they may be cloud tools, look where they can actually provide access capabilities for you rather than having to do something individualized, right? But it won't work everywhere, right? So you have to consider, okay, how I'm going to do my SSH key management. Now, how I'm going to manage who gets SSH keys, or how can I leverage my privileged access management vault? So I think understanding this universe of different types and how you expect to manage them is probably the next thing we do. It's awareness, and then building a plan about how you're going to execute each of these different machine identity types. I do want to say that there's a class of tools and capabilities that are emerging that'll help with this understanding, and this is called cloud infrastructure entitlement management tools. They're emerging, and I think they're actually really becoming central to zero trust for organizations to understand just what entities, what can they do in my environment, right? I think this is a good use for those tools as well. They will give you a good sense for where accounts are, what those accounts can do, and they all have some analytical capabilities. Will tell you, man, this might be a little over permissioning here with these accounts, right? Which is really an important thing to do, to know, so that you can help limit, which accounts have certain entitlements, permissions, of what they can do.
Great. Well, thank you, Ross. It's been a great discussion. Ross Ford, IT subject matter expert at the CDM program at CISA at DHS. Thank you, Ross, for your time, and until the next time. And we have Alyssa for some final comments.
Yes, thank you so much, Ross and Tom. That was a great fireside chat. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today. Thank you again to Beyond Trust for partnering with us on this summit, as well as our panelists, moderator, and keynote. Before you head out, there is one final polling question about your CP credits. If you would like to receive your CP credit, we'll send it right to your email. All you have to do is fill out that poll question. You do have to have filled out all 3 polling questions in order to get that credit. We'd also like to thank you for joining us today. We hope to see you at our next event, which is a webinar happening on Thursday. Have a great rest of your day.